What up, YouTube? This is Steven, and I have an article that I would like to share with you. Alright, so I was browsing around the internet and I found this article, and it's titled, Why Not to Study Spanish? And I guess this is from the now defunct Kessler list, or something like that, from June 18, 2010, on linguistics and philology. Philology. Theology? Anywho, all right, so I was reading this list, and I was like, wow, this list is really offensive, you know? And I was like, why would, well, I thought it was offensive, but also it's like, you know, it kind of speaks to how sometimes people view Spanish, especially in the United States. And I think that is because of the speakers and like who Spanish is associated with, you know? This, I'll go through the list. It's sort of long, but I think I can breeze through this and give you pretty much the gist of it. you know. All right, this is by someone named James Kessler. Who cares? So here we go. Reason number one not to learn Spanish. Very little of value has been written in Spanish. Okay. So value is often, in my personal opinion, value depends on what you consider valuable. All right. This person goes on to say, on the typical Occidental great books reading list, only one piece of literature, Don Quixote, makes the cut, for Spanish. And I haven't seen these lists, perhaps, maybe not. Often I see that guy, Gabriel. I know there have been many Nobel Prize, Nobel Prize winners in literature for Spanish language literature. So I'm guessing they don't see this as valuable. Of course, there's more to a language than just literature. And he does go on to cite some other things. But he also says like minor languages like Gaelic and Icelandic have produced more enduring works of literature than Spanish. That kind of, is up for interpretation, really. The people who put this list together, what makes them the authority? Because they have PhDs, because they are people who write enduring works of literature. Like, what makes them, the authority? All right, reason numero dos, number two. American students who have studied Spanish as a foreign language on average scored around 100 points lower on the verbal portion of the SAT than do students who have studied other languages. And he goes on to make some citations. For instance, in 2009, students who previously studied Latin scored on average 676 on the verbal portion of the SAT. Students who studied French scored about 631 on average. Students who studied German about 630 on average. Students who studied Hebrew about 619 on average. Students who study Spanish about 557. So it's about lower than what he's been citing here. Let's see, the 2009 average, or SAT verbal score average of students who previously studied Spanish was over 100 points lower than the average score of students who previously studied Latin. And let's assume that these are true. Let's assume that all this is true. Perhaps it is. I'm not saying that he's a liar or anything, but it would make more sense with Latin because a lot of words from English, and a lot of words from English has a lot of roots in Latin and also in French. and English is a Germanic language, so perhaps yes. Okay, more relation to German as well. As far as the Hebrew, I'm not sure where that kind of comes from. Eh. um, but overall, I think if you are studying a language strictly to improve your vocabulary, then I would say perhaps you should study maybe Latin instead if it's strictly for vocabulary. I don't. I think that'd be one of the few uses you can actually utilize as far as studying Latin. And as far as studying French, I think that would be your next best, your your best option as far as being able to utilize a vocabulary and as well utilize the language itself. However, these are American students, so French probably wouldn't make much sense to study, well, as much as say Spanish, and German would make even less sense. Hebrew will make less sense unless you are of some type of French, German, or Hebrew background. People who study Spanish in the United States are often people like Spanish is so widespread in the United States that it would make more sense for people to study Spanish. So the people who study Spanish, while you can gain vocabulary from Spanish, oftentimes they're not studying it to gain a higher vocabulary. And also, you can make that argument about Mandarin Chinese, even though Mandarin Chinese is probably a very good language to study as well. Arabic, you can make that same argument with Arabic. Just because you can't use it, just because the vocabulary isn't, you know, congruent to English or more connected to English, doesn't make it less than a language, you know. All right, next, number 3. Very few peer-reviewed journals, example given, in mathematics, physics, the sciences, and classical philology, I think that's how you say it, are written in Spanish. More journals are written in French and German than in Spanish. So this is about peer-reviewed journals here. And to keep it real, the majority of peer-reviewed journals often want you to publish in English. Keep it real. Even though perhaps this person is correct, more journals are published in French and German than Spanish, perhaps. But there's a phrase in kind of like the modern language department where it's like publish in English or die, or something like that, or perish. Because oftentimes you are, drawn to publish in English. Really? Yeah, publishing in English would be your best option. I mean, even though it'd be cool to publish in both French, in English or German in English, But there are, peer-reviewed journals that are published in Spanish, I guess maybe they're not of the, hard sciences and mathematics, so they probably don't consider, to matter as much. But, to keep it real, I believe there are journals that are published about, the hard sciences, and mathematics and things like that in Spanish, as well as German and French. I'm pretty sure you can find some in even like Japanese and Chinese, as well. you know. So ultimately, it's just like that may be true, but the majority of journals are probably published in English, as well. So you could probably make that same argument about French and German if you compare them to English, I mean, also, you don't, like when you study a language, I mean, that is sort of like a selling point, but I think Spanish has other selling points to people as well. But let's move on. Reason number 4, unless one wants to pursue a career in landscaping or move to Mexico, there is very little practical advantage to learning Spanish and multiple intellectual advantages to studying other languages. All right, so right there sort of definitely seem like some like subtle racial undertone or a subtle discriminatory undertone, like really pursue a career in landscaping or move to Mexico, really. Well, the thing is, like a lot of businesses in the United States have opted to include Spanish speaking services. Many times you can call up to, say, um, certain banking institutions and press 2 for Espanol. You cannot do that for, say, French and German as well. Like that, for me, that is sort of symbolizing that, okay, businesses are seeing that, having Spanish speaking services for people and their customers is advantageous. It's going to help them gain more customers since they're like, okay, hey, they speak my language and I feel more comfortable doing business in my own language, Spanish. So you can get a job using Spanish without having to have a career in landscaping, or move to Mexico. You know, there are many other, a plethora of Spanish-speaking countries. People usually, especially in the United States, usually think of Mexico when they think of Spanish, but it's so much more than that, though. So the author goes on to say, most Spanish-speaking or Spanish speakers around the world are uneducated. Example given: the Amerindian, as an American Indian / mestizo populations of the New World, reinforcing Spanish or Spanish's lowbrow aura. All right, so basically, like the brown folks of the New World aren't really educated. Brown people can't be educated. Um, I could go into a whole spiel about that. Like why do you think that brown folks suffer in regards to education? Why do you think that? It just happened, or was there a system put in place to make that happen? Let's keep it real. However, I don't think that all of the brown people of the New World are uneducated. I'm pretty sure there are a ton of educated brown people. And to keep it real, there are people who speak French that are uneducated probably as well. French is a widespread language, at least in Africa. And you can make that same argument there, since there are educational issues in Africa, to keep it real. Not that I want to like bash Africa, which I don't, but I'm just saying, as far as the French is concerned. And you can make that argument with English. There are uneducated people who speak English because English is such a widespread language. You know, so of course you're gonna have some uneducated people. You know, but I don't think that the most of them are. I think that is kind of like a stereotype. You know, coming from a very like a place of superiority. You know. Let's see. The author goes on to say most Amerindian / mestizo dominated Spanish speaking countries have low IQ averages. Example given: Ecuador 80, Guatemala 79, Mexico 87, Puerto Rico 84. Whereas French and German speaking populations have high average IQs. Example given: Austria 102, Belgium 100, France 98, German 102, and Switzerland 101. All right, to be fair, these IQ average quotients have like a racial undertone in them themselves, because usually they're being used to sort of say, okay, these people are smart, these people are not. I think like that was part of their origin as far as like the IQ test. That's when it was a part of their origin. I think so. I could be wrong. If I am, let me know and give me some citations to read up on. But I think they did have like IQ tests did have origins in racism, and also they are probably somewhat culturally or racially biased anyway. And also, you notice the countries that he cites; these are European countries: Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Switzerland. But I noticed he didn't cite, for Spanish, he didn't cite Argentina, he didn't cite Chile, he didn't cite Uruguay, he didn't cite Spain. He concentrated on the kind of like the more brown population here. And also, I noticed when he was citing the French-speaking countries, he didn't cite any countries in Africa. Why not? Hmm. Hmm. Why not? Since French is such a prestigious language. Of course, anyone who speaks French would automatically have an IQ of over 100, or whatever is considered you know fancy. All right. Um, he also goes on to say for number four, to study a language in part is to study and mimic the people who speak it. The question then is whether one wants to emulate a low IQ people or a high IQ people. By studying Spanish, one will imitate those of a lower IQ. You're mimicking them as far as speaking, but you're not. You don't necessarily have to mimic them as far as like your life is concerned. If you have issues with that, you know. Um, but also studying a language is also studying the people and studying the culture and studying like the history of them as well. And you may in that in that pursuit find out why education is the way it is in certain countries. People with this type of mindset have gone into these countries via colonization and have set up these like situations here where access to education might not be as easy for some people as it is for other people, perhaps. you know and it is set up that way. It did not happen. It just didn't happen that brown people didn't want to pursue education. you know assuming all this is true. you know all right, so number five. Let's see. Number five is having been influenced by Arabic in Spain and Amerindian languages in the New World, Spanish in many respects is the least European of European languages. Well, you can make an argument about that for English as well, since English has had different influence too. Say the English spoken in Jamaica, in like the Caribbean area, versus the English spoken in Africa, versus the English as well. Like English has had so many different influences. Like American English and British English are different. Does that make one better than the other? You know. As well, British English versus like Scottish English versus English in Singapore versus English in Australia. Like, there's so many different influences there. But is one influence lesser than the other influence? You know? And again, English has had non, I guess, European influences. Is that a bad thing? You know? I'm sure the French spoken in Africa has had some non-European influence as well. You know, for that small-speaking German population in Africa, I'm pretty sure it's the same way. Again, does that make the language less than? Is inferior because it doesn't have a European influence? Again, with this whole like kind of like subtle like white supremacist theme in here. Let's see. Next, the author goes on to say, today only a small minority of Spanish speakers are of the European diaspora. Most Spanish speakers today are Mauritian, mestizo, or mulatto. Not that this is a problem. That's the kind of like the author trying to clean it up a little bit. Not that that's a problem, but if one wants to learn a language fully representative of a traditional Western folkways, then Spanish is not the best choice. So Western, I'm guessing, is supposed to be synonymous with European. So basically, if you want to learn about, a language that is like fully representative of European people, of white people, then Spanish would not be the best choice. Now that the author does mention it, and bring it to light, I guess Spanish is probably one of the less European languages, so to speak. I think that sort of the author sees that as a negative, thus seeing, he sees that as a negative. So he is seeing, you know, brown people and probably black people too as less than. It's like a reflection because these people speak it, thus it's less than. But if all these people were Caucasian and spoke it, then it would be pretty cool. If they were in the same place but Caucasian instead of brown, it would be all right, you know. And also he seems to cite, the influences of, Arabic and, indigenous languages of the New World, but he also fails to cite the African influence as well. There is an African influence in the Spanish spoken in the Caribbean as well. Well, not that that's a bad thing, but yeah. But I think if you would like to experience more of Europe, concentrate on Spain. You know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know when I was taking Spanish in college, we were given a choice between taking a course in Latin American, culture and history, and Spain culture and history. I chose Spain because I felt that Spain was probably like it was a smaller place, so it was probably like less like less to concentrate on versus Latin America, which is like so many different countries compose Latin America. And that's why I was interested in learning about like the history of Spain and things like that. And I think it was a great class. Um, I enjoyed learning about the history of Spain and things like that. But I also did enjoy learning about kind of like the New World as well. The thing is with Spanish, like so many different types of people speak Spanish, though. That's the thing. When you have German, most of your German speakers are Caucasian or German, or either Austrian or something. But European, white. Say if this was Japanese, most of your Japanese speakers are mostly Japanese. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just saying like Spanish is such a wide spoken language that you would be able to probably receive a bit more from Spanish as far as like the culture, different cultures and different people than say maybe a language that's not as widespread as Spanish, like German or Japanese, etc. Like other languages. um, you know. But if you want to learn a language fully representative of traditional Western folk ways, then Spanish perhaps might not be your best choice. Perhaps you should learn maybe a German language. But if you really just want to learn about, humanity in general, not just the white humanity, then, I think Spanish would be a great option. All right. Next, reason number 6. Historically, English has been most influenced by German, Latin, and French in terms of refining one's understanding of English etymology and grammar. It is more beneficial for native English speakers to study German, Latin, and French. The foundation of a traditional upper class education for native English speakers has always consisted of German, Latin, and French. And I have studied Latin and French in college. I kind of wanted to study German, but I just never had the opportunity to. I probably should have seized the opportunity in high school. I studied some French in high school, and I studied some Latin in college, and I studied Spanish throughout high school and throughout college. So obviously, you know where my biases lie, right? If you don't by now. But, you know, I feel like German and Latin and French are great, great to learn. They both have the pros of, their benefits, and understanding English etymology and grammar. If you want to do that in order to learn, if you want to learn a language in order to better, solidify your knowledge of English, etymology and grammar, it probably would be more beneficial to learn, Latin, because a lot of English words have roots in Latin, French because a lot of English borrows from French, and German because German is a Germanic language, perhaps, However, I will say that Spanish has sort of a a beautiful complexity to it that you may not get from other languages. And that complexity may open your mind a bit more. You know, like take for instance, like, sir and estar. I don't see like a lot of languages doing that. Sir and estar both mean to be. Like I am, you are, we are, they are, etc. Sort of like that. But they're two different words and they're used two different ways to express many a different um, idea and concepts. And that right there can open your mind to so much. And as well, sentence structure in Spanish is not quite the same as sentence structure in English. It's some differences there, but that does open your mind more. It expands your mind. And part of learning a language is to expand your mind and expand your point of view, and to learn more. So perhaps, you may not be able to apply Spanish grammar and etymology to English directly, but you will get something from it and you will have a better understanding of language in general. All right. Reason number 7. Just because many Spanish speakers are present in the United States, it is unnecessary for most Americans to learn Spanish. History is replete with examples of the ruling class refusing to learn the language of foreign migrant workers and instead learning a more refined language. The Greeks, Romans, Habsburgs, etc. All right. So this might be a kind of like a little nudge, like, hey, we don't need to accommodate, foreign migrant workers who we look down on, especially if they're brown. Perhaps that's where the author's coming from. Maybe not. But, well, I think for people who learn Spanish in the United States, they learn this language that is a foreign language, but it's not foreign. It's like you don't have to travel to Spain to use Spanish. You don't have to travel to Mexico to use Spanish. You can use Spanish, going down the block. Depending on where you live in the United States, just go down the block a couple of blocks, and you can speak Spanish. Turn on TV, you can hear Spanish. Turn on your radio, you can hear Spanish. Go to the bookstore, you can probably purchase books in Spanish or magazines in Spanish. You know, so it's for people who study Spanish in the United States, they are given an opportunity to use this foreign language in authentic context. People who study French won't be given that opportunity in the United States, not nearly as much. People who study German, definitely not. People who study Latin, yeah, right. No one speaks Latin except for like the Pope. So if you want to speak to the Pope, then yeah, learn Latin. If you want to live in France, learn Latin. Learn French. If you want to live in Germany, learn French. Even though I've heard that when many English speakers go to Germany, they often speak to them in English instead of German. So it's kind of like, hey, I'm kind of learning this language, and it's like I can't really use it since people are speaking to me in English because they kind of sense that you got some of an accent, and they're like, hey, you speak English, so I'm going to speak to you in English. So, you don't have to learn, Spanish just because there are many Spanish speakers present in the United States, but that's actually kind of like maybe more so a reason why people will want to learn a foreign language since they can actually use it, and they may perhaps be marrying into a family that knows or, speaks Spanish, or perhaps have become friends with people who speak Spanish and just want to learn more, perhaps, There's not anything wrong with that. All right, next reason. Too many Americans already study Spanish. People need to diversify and study other languages. I kind of think this is probably the most logical reason the author has given thus far, I think there's some truth with that. It's kind of like is the default foreign language to study in the United States. And perhaps people do need to diversify and learn, study other languages as well. Perhaps. But there's sort of like a practicality, like Spanish is useful and practical in the United States. So many people often study Spanish, as well as the default foreign language. So people just go into Spanish. And as well, the beginning phase of Spanish is probably less daunting than the beginning phase of French, from what I've heard and from what I've experienced. You know, um, Not to say that Spanish is an easier language to study than French, and that French is so complicated. Really, in totality, studying French from like the beginning point to the furthest final point you can go to, and studying Spanish from the beginning to the furthest point you can go to, in totality, both languages are probably as complex as each other. It's just certain areas are more complex or less complex than other areas of the language. So it's like the beginning phase of Spanish is less complex, while the beginning phase of French is more complex. But after you get past the beginning phase of French, it probably gets a little easier, while in Spanish, it kind of tends to get a little bit more difficult, you know? Especially when you start throwing in like the subjunctive, the imperfect, you know, as well as like sentence structures, like different types of sentence structures and things like that. And even like simple things like, like por versus para can be kind of complicated in some situations. So, while Spanish, like, I don't want people to be thinking like, oh, Spanish is just such an English easy language, and that, of course anyone can speak it. Yeah. Because there's more to the story than that. All right. All right. Reason number 9. Spanish is not an inflected language. To facilitate a deeper understanding of grammar, students are better served by studying an inflected language like German or Latin. Again, with the whole grammar thing, I think you can have a deeper understanding of grammar studying Spanish, or you can at least have like you can understand grammar in a different way. German grammar probably is similar to English grammar. As far as Latin is concerned, I think probably Spanish and Latin have probably like a similar grammar. From what I've read, I think like Latin is kind of like every word, like the word has to be spelled a certain way depending on its function in the sentence. Like for instance, if the word is functioning as a indirect object versus the subject, it'll be spelled differently. Like it'll be spelled a little different on the end. It's called I think noun declension. I think. All right. So here's the last piece of information the author wants to leave us with. Of course, if one is of a Meridian, Mestizo, or Spanish background, I guess they didn't want to include, mulatto for some reason. Whatever. Then there would be an ancestral reason for learning Spanish. That is true, obviously. Likewise, people of Irish ancestry would be compelled to learn Gaelic, people of Russian ancestry, Russian, etc. For all other people, there are few legitimate reasons for studying Spanish. See above, ancestral considerations outweigh all others. Well, a lot of people speak Spanish. Spanish is considered a significant language in the world. I think people have a certain view of Spanish in the United States as sort of like a language of brown people, of the like working class, poor, brown people. So I think that sort of stigmatizes the language for some people, and it's not maybe seen as, you know, prestigious as French or, you know, Latin or German, you know, perhaps. But really, I think Spanish probably is the more practical language, and it is growing as well. You know, Spanish is gaining more and more ground as we speak. You know, notice in the United States when politicians are running for office, they often will, you know, use Spanish speaking ads, you know, Spanish language ads to advertise for advertisement, you know. Um, it is a significant voting block. That's a reason to learn Spanish if you're a politician, you know. As well, businesses are utilizing Spanish speaking services, you know, because Spanish speakers have a lot of buying power. They want to cash in on that buying power, you know. That's a reason to learn Spanish, you know. Spanish has been spoken in the United States for longer than English, actually. Um, so, you know, Spanish is not really as foreign as a language as you think it is. You know, it's not really as foreign as you think. You know, technically English is probably the more foreign language if you want to get technical about it. Not that I'm trying to make an argument that English should be, well, Spanish should be considered like our official language, but I think that really it should be like both Spanish and English as official languages in the United States. But people will probably be arguing against that because, again, people view Spanish as the language of brown, foreign people who are of like the poor working class, and it's like, oh, we're accommodating them, and you know, people have an issue with that. Certain people have an issue with that. You know, people who probably would like the things that were said in this article. You know, you know, people with that, you know, that superiority thing. You know, um, but overall, you learn a language because it's just. I think for me personally, it's about having a connection with the people and the culture. You know, and being interested in the culture. You know. um, So that makes learning the language easier. But what do you guys think? Feel free to let me know. Feel free to comment. Feel free to subscribe. Feel free to give me a thumbs up. Your feedback and support are extremely appreciated and extremely valued. Until the next video, adios and goodbye for now.